Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour, and guess what? We're not actually done with Matthew 16, verses 13 through 20 yet, in Peter's confession of Christ. And the reason for that is because sometimes when I'm doing this thing, I put together an episode, and then I go home, and I'm like, there, now we're done with that part of the Bible. That was good. I am happy. And then I lay with my head on the pillow, and I stare at the little sparkles and dots on the ceiling, and the house is quiet, and everyone's asleep, and I think about my life, just how it's going, and the end of youth, and how I've passed along my youth and my energy to my kids, and how I'm invested in them now. And I think about the big questions, and love and society, and what it all means. And then I think about this podcast we do together, and I'm like, hey, wait a dang minute, I forgot to say that other thing I wanted to say. No, we ain't done with that passage. And then I make a moral resolution, and I come right back here, and we're going to talk about it more. So here we are with a bonus day on Matthew 16, verses 13 through 20 in Peter's confession of Christ. And this is why. Because I set up this whole thing back at the beginning with the whole episode we did on Caesarea Philippi. Remember, the first detail Matthew gives us in this anecdote is that they go to Caesarea Philippi. Verse 13 of Matthew 16, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And I was like, going to set up this whole thing like in this prologue and then be like, I don't know, it's a big mystery. But secretly, I'd kind of thought about it a little bit. And then as we worked on it, I thought about it more. And then at the end, I was going to be like, and boom, bombshell. Look at this. So here comes the thing, and maybe it's not as big of a bombshell, and maybe you already thought of it, but here's exactly why I think Matthew gives us this detail that all of this happened in Caesarea Philippi. Reset. What we have here is Jesus pushing the gas pedal and being like, all right, guys, tell me who you think I really am. And Peter looks at him, he's like, you are the Christ, meaning the Messiah, the Son of God. And Jesus is like, yep, yes, I am. And you, since we're making confessions about who people are Peter. And on this rock, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And as we discussed, there are good, brilliant people who look at that and say that sets up a line of apostolic succession throughout history, and the Catholic Church is the best representation of that. There are good people who look at that and say, no, I'm not sure that's actually what it means. I would interpret it more in this other way. Look, we can high five over that, whatever. People are going to read that different ways. But what everybody agrees on is that Jesus is saying that something special happened right there, that Peter is right, and that this is not the end game. That confession is not the end game. There's this thing that's going to be built and that's going to gain momentum. And it sounds a lot like all the stuff he's saying about the kingdom. But in this case, he's using the word the church. And it's this expression of the kingdom that we're starting to get a little bit of a taste of here. And this church thing is going to have power. And at bare minimum, everybody seems to agree that that power is going to be from God, and that it is going to include the power of the words of life, the message of salvation, the message of hope in Jesus, and that that message is going to be efficacious, not just in terms of people changing the way they think or live here, but it's going to be efficacious into eternity. So we got all of that stuff sitting there. This then really is a key theological passage for who Jesus is, for how history is going to unfold, and all of that stuff. Jesus says the gates of Hades are not going to prevail against the church. People often run with that, and they're like, oh, so hell isn't going to win. And this is like a spiritual warfare battle between Jesus and Satan thing, but he intentionally says Hades. He's using a Greek term for the place where the dead go, like in Disney's Hercules, and they all swim around in that circle. I think Jesus is referencing a cultural concept people would have had, not necessarily affirming Greek mythology here. But what he's saying is death isn't going to defeat the church. Life in Christ, in the kingdom, in God, is going to defeat death. And so then this power that Peter and I believe the disciples and all the followers of Jesus who come after, this power that is being handed off to them by Jesus is one that, by the power of God, defeats death. This is a pretty gigantic deal here in this passage. But why do we need to know that it's in Caesarea Philippi? Remember, Caesarea Philippi is a place associated with another reference to Greek-ish Hellenistic legend and myth. That is, that it's one of the sites in the ancient Near East and in Greece associated with Pan, that guy that looks like Mr. Tumnus from the Chronicles of Narnia. It's like a faun with the little goat feet and the human body, and he plays the little flute. You can picture Pan. If I remember right, he's the only god who died. I don't know if that factors in. I should have thought about that more in advance. Whatever the case, it's a place associated with that. You'll recall there's a cave there called the Cave of Pan that somehow leads down toward the underworld. It's the birthplace of Pan. So interesting that Jesus then draws on this Hades imagery right here, and we're introduced to this notion of death being defeated in Christ, which is obviously going to be a pretty big theme in the rest of Matthew and in the rest of the New Testament and the rest of Christianity and forever. But what you have in Caesarea Philippi isn't just the Pan thing. You've got an intersection of a bajillion different beliefs. I mean, pretty much all of the competing beliefs are represented in this little town, this little region. You've got Hellenism, Greekism, Greek mythology in Pan. You've got the old gods of the East still represented there, at least in cultural memory, as this was something of a crossroads where the Persians and the Babylonians would have passed through with all of their ideology and all of their mythology and all of their mega power and their human living emperor gods who don't look so goddish now after being defeated repeatedly by the Greeks. And then you've also got this white marble temple, you'll recall, that Josephus tells about, that Herod the Great built in honor of the emperor. And the emperor is a living god. This is the new one. Well, the other ones, they claim to be living gods, but they were fake. They didn't really turn out to be. But this one, this emperor, this politician, he really is a living god. This time you can totally trust us. Look at that super fancy white marble temple. Would that be there if he weren't an actual living deity? I mean, he's the preeminent politician. I mean, pretty obviously a living deity. So you've got that cult of the emperor that's growing there, and that temple ends up effectively serving for the worship of multiple living deities as emperors come and go over the years. In fact, the town gets renamed for a different emperor a few years later. But whatever the case, you've got the old gods of the Far East, the old gods of Greek mythology, the new gods of the emperor cult of the West in Rome. Plus, on top of that, remember, this place is named Caesarea Philippi by somebody from the Herod family. And he's Idumean. He's not even really Jewish. So there's a mingling of deities and theology there as well. And then on top of that, you obviously have the historical religion of the Canaanites and the Jewish people there as well. So, dang, you got stuff that you can see from where they're sitting having this conversation probably that is representative of just about every form of worship or claim to deity or anything ever that the original audience could think of. And Jesus picks this spot to be like, okay, let's sort through this God question. A lot of claimants, a lot of stuff out there. Then when you look at all of these things, I mean, one of them just kind of looks like a hole in the ground. Another one is just a distant memory of some armies on the march centuries earlier. Another one is some guy that lives halfway across the country, and really his only representation here is an occupying military force and a temple that got built by somebody else who's already dead. And then you got this homeless guy, 31, 32 years old, sitting right in front of you, talking with you, who you've seen break the laws of time and space, and who's done enough to make you think that maybe he actually could prevail against Hades, prevail against death. Maybe he could be the actual claimant, not even just to the Jewish notion of Messiah, but to the human notion that transcends all of culture and all of time, the human notion of deity, of God, of the first cause, of that one truest, true north truth that for all of the debates and tweets and arguing and votes and politics and fighting and persuasion to figure out what will be the new moral consensus on this thing or the new thought du jour, all of the debate aside, like Jesus has done stuff that makes it look like he might be like the truth, the actual one. And so I think the fact that all of this stuff goes down at this crossroads of culture, at this crossroads of attempted and failed answers to the question, what is the one true thing? What is the one true God? What is the one true truth? I think it's really intentional that it happens right here. And that little bow that we needed to tie on this passage, I think, was worth the extra day. Again, I want to say a huge thank you to people who read this passage and come to conclusions like me. Hey, cool, thanks for being gracious. None of you have been mean to anybody, as best as I can tell. It's awesome. I also want to say thank you to people who read this passage and come to different conclusions than me. I don't think you're crazy. I don't think you're bad. In fact, I increasingly understand why you come to those conclusions. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, the profundity and the beauty of all the stuff we just spent 10 minutes talking about far outweighs the stuff that we might want to debate here. That is the lesser issue in this passage. The greater issue in this passage is the gigantic and defensible claim that Jesus is making against this geographical backdrop that he is more than just an important religious figure, but the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, and effectively evident from all of this context, God in the flesh. That's a big deal. Thanks for thinking this thing through with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.